Da 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 da. How you doing? Hello, everybody. Today we are talking about the OTA, last OTA of the year. We will be covering it. A lot of changes, some impactful changes. There's a lot of changes that affect direct meta, like top meta game decks. So this should pretty much shake up the meta in a big way. There are a lot of changes that I don't particularly love, and we'll go over them, but there are also some pretty cool ones that I think will be pretty interesting to start experimenting with. So let's get started. So getting started with this OTA patch, first one we're going to talk about is probably the most important change. They are adjusting Professor X. Now, they did say they were going to adjust lockdown, so this is probably their conclusion. Just Professor X was like the main issue. So they're turning it from a 5-3 to a 5-1, same ability. I don't know. The card looks ugly to me. It's a 5-1 that you play to lock down a lane. Like it's the worst it could be, but it does what its job. It pretty much restricts Professor X to like Miss Marvel synergy and things like that, right? Miss Marvel into Onslaught, that kind of potential. So it's really losing a lot of its flexibility in like just playing it casually. It means that Jeff just like eats this card if you're not playing it with any type of buffer or with any type of early game plan. It will just eat this card. It's just a lot more. It's a lot riskier, essentially, right? 3 power sometimes was enough to be the difference between winning or losing that lane. Now 1 power, it just kind of falls to everything. The cards like Mr. Fantastic that no one really runs, right? Could take this by itself, right? So there's just a lot of weaknesses now to it. I will say there's always a weakness of making things high cost, low energy. I mean, high energy, low power, just because like Mr. Negative could maybe take a look at this and see if they want to start incorporating this into their decks, right? That's definitely something to consider. But in essence, it's just a very. I wonder how many people are going to be playing with this card now. So, a pretty impactful change to lockdown, and a lot of a lot of high level players, right, will kind of know that you're playing Professor X. The way you set up, right, you're playing everything in one lane, and you're playing a ramp on 3, that kind of thing. So, it's just a lot. It's just a lot riskier to do the same things you used to do. Maybe it will evolve and there be a different way of playing Professor X, or it will be so niche that it actually surprises people nowadays. But yeah, definitely an ugly change, but it does do its intention probably of making like full lockdown a lot worse. So, well, not a lot worse, but like doing it by using Professor X a lot riskier. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, not too sure about this change in particular. They do have some. That's all fun and games when you're curving Warpath to destroy, but that's not really happening with Professor X lately. No. As we've pushed the ability to access extra energy or attack locations without playing directly to them, Xavier's become a centerpiece threat in decks aiming to aggressively restrict the play. Yeah, that's true. That's a dynamic we want to control carefully. Professor XX were especially effective in preying on metagames in Flux. These are both times we prefer players focus on the excitement of what's possible versus insulating them from the threat of a lockdown location. For now, we're just saying that probably the reduction we hope is stern enough to make players try harder to threaten these kind of wins. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I'm not in love, but let's move on. There's a lot to talk about here. Next up we have Werewolf by Night. This is, I mean, it's not a surprise, but the change itself is pretty drastic. So it's going from a 3-3 to a 4-4. So that's pretty impactful, since a lot of times you want to play Werewolf on 3 and then start your bounce engine, start bouncing everything, and you really make this like a 3, and a 9, a 3-11, these type of power stat lines. Now that you have to do a little bit later, it's going to be a lot harder to just like have that like high roll potential. You only have 2 turns, maybe 3 if you're playing Magic, to really do that kind of thing. So it really hurts. It does mean that you might want to just play this with Zabu, though Zabu wasn't the original intention of Werewolf. So definitely a big change there. It also nerfs Loki. Something to mention: there's no Loki nerfs directly here, which I'm surprised still. Like, it just seems like Loki just keeps getting under the radar or whatever. But there's no Loki nerfs anymore in this patch as well. So this does nerf current Loki's decks, because Loki does play Werewolf into Loki. Now you don't really get to do that unless you're playing Zabu, which you are doing already. So this could just make Loki decks more reliant on Zabu to go Zabu into Werewolf. But a lot of them weren't using the Zabu engine, they're using the Bounce engine. They might go back to using the Zabu engine. So, definitely an interesting change here. I'm not sure I love it. Like Darkhawk, Werewolf by Night offers a few different decks with early source of pressure that's hard to compete with. Yeah, Werewolf is too good. That's the thing. I would say that Werewolf is just a very strong card as a 3/3. Werewolf is also a card that's hard to master. Sure, there's that it's strong enough that some silver decks have even cut Brood to play Werewolf. That makes sense, because Werewolf, I would argue, is better than Brood in a lot of cases. You're not taking 3 spaces in terms of. There's a lot to play in Surfer decks, so you can actually kind of fill your lanes even without a Brood. When a card's strength is enough to unseat foundational cards and other archetypes, that's usually a bit too much. So they were scared that Werewolf was so good that even Brood couldn't compete, and that scared them. We considered many changes, but wanted to try and maintain the excitement of leaping ferociously across the board with a meaningful threat. To accomplish that, we're going to try moving Werewolf up to 4 causes. Should remove a meaningful amount of energy and time from the card and bring Brood back. So the fact that Brood stopped being played in Surfer decks was what was scaring them, so they decided to adjust it. I mean, Loki decks is the real problem with Werewolf, I would say. Loki bounce, that kind of thing, and that also hurts Loki bounce. So it is adjusting some of the best decks in the meta. I would say Loki bounce is definitely one of the better decks to be playing. So big nerf to that. We'll see. I think Loki by itself doesn't need Werewolf to be good. So even though you're hurting Loki, you could still just play Loki without Werewolf and you'd be fine. So definitely interesting to see Werewolf get adjusted, but the card was strong enough that I think it's almost fair. This one I'm a little bit surprised about. We just had a buff here. It got the -1, the -1 Widow's Bite. Now it's going from a 2/1 to a 3/3. So just a weird one. I forgot to change the on reveal here, but it adds a Widow's Bite that gives you a -1 power, essentially. But it's going from a 2/1 to a 3/3. Shifting Widow's Bite to 0/0/1 is an effective boost to Black Widow strength, and there are decks playing Widow today we're happy to see. We're less happy with how easy and rewarding it is to use Beast, or some locations play Widow's Bite multiple times. So they didn't like that you could play Widow's Bite on 2, Beast on 3, Widow's Bite on 4, that kind of thing. So we're moving it at a higher cost to make that more difficult. This is similar to a principle we've made to a Rock Slide, shifting a card's cost to raise the strength floor but lower the ceiling. I will say, like, the weird part about this is you kind of kill it off in Zabu decks, right? Because Zabu already wants to either be playing the Zabu buffed card or Rock Slide on 3. So it's like, are you really going to be playing Black Widow on 3 as well? Like, have that many options for turn 3, where you already have like 2 really good ones. So it's just like hard to see where Black Widow goes into decks, right? Because I think Zabu decks aren't really in love with a 3 cost. Like, when it's on 2, it's either you play Zabu, you can play Black Widow, you have options. Now on 3, it's a lot harder to say, oh, either I play the Zabu buff card, or I play a Black Widow, or I play a Rock Slide. You'd probably, I mean, it's arguable, right? But Rock Slide definitely has more potential, at least for Darkhawk than a Black Widow does. Though Black Widow has its own potential too. So definitely weird, and it also does remove it in bounce. Bounce really liked playing Black Widow on 2 and then Beast on 3. Now you have to play Black Widow on 3 and Beast on 4. And where you it's and then even if you beast it, it's 2 mana instead of 1 mana, so it's just not that good of a play anymore. So definitely I don't love this change, right? I would rather you just nerf the Widow's Bite back if that was the problem, because I feel like it's a lot harder to find spaces to play Black Widow now. So this change I'm really not a fan of. I don't see how this is going to let Black Widow be played in more decks. It just feels like you nerfed it, you buffed it, and then it was playable, and then you saw, hey, this is a frustrating card when it's playable. Let's nerf it back into an awkward spot that it's now a lot less likely to be played. So just seems kind of counterintuitive to do it like that. So I just don't like this change too much at all. Next up, we have Martyr. I think this one was to be expected, to be fair. 1/4 was really not justifiable to play at all. So moving it from a 1/4 to a 1/5, it's just hard to kind of see where it goes, where you need to pretty much lock all the lanes to make this do well. Otherwise, it's just going to be a card that moves to an empty lane that you're not really contesting, that's easy to lose. So it's kind of hard. You can definitely like fight every lane if you want to, right? Things like Dr. Doom can help you with that. So there's definitely some power. I do think 1/5 is definitely more approachable as a card you might want to experiment with compared to the 1/4. So we'll just see if people start working with this and decks will find a solution to it. Also, you know, once the new one cost synergy comes out, maybe people start experimenting with this a little bit more. But I don't think this is something you should like jump to start picking up in your collection or anything like that. It doesn't really seem like the 1 power is going to be that crazy of a difference maker, but could definitely be wrong. But I'm not expecting it. It's clear we missed low on Martyr, yeah. So we're coming with a quick buff here. It definitely had really bad stats, so I wonder if the 1 power is going to change the values. So basically you're just saying we've learned a lot by making weak cards. Hopefully we'll be better at making not as weak cards. Great. Next up we have Viper. So this is pretty quick, right? It means that they tested out the Havoc Viper combo and was like, oh, maybe this is problematic too. So let's already change it, right? Because usually they'll release Havoc and then Havoc Viper will have like 2-3 weeks of dominance or power, and then it'll get nerfed in the patch or something like that. Here it was getting adjusted even before Havoc was released, right? So it just means like maybe it was too annoying in their playtesting. But yeah, they're turning Viper into a 3/4, which is a lot harder to mess with compared to a 2/3. It means that if you don't have any synergy, Havoc Viper is coming out on turn 5, which is just not that crazy comparative to turn 3, right? You could still get it on turn 4 if you have like Ravonna or any ramp, but it's still less likely to be that game changing now. Between Annihilus, Selena, and our changes to Luke Cage, deck focused on gumming up the enemy side of Luke Cage. Black cards have received a lot of new tools as a deck gain options. Sometimes interesting to look at shifting around existing pieces to see where their play patterns could change. Viper is not a problematic card. Our goal here isn't a nerf, but a change. Yeah, it's a nerf. Let's be honest. 3/4 is interesting in that regard. However, motivation for this change is largely an abundance of caution around Havoc. So yeah, so it is Havoc. We've tried some turn 3, turn 4 Havoc Viper ourselves. It didn't impress. I think turn 3 Havoc is pretty impressive. I don't know about that. A lot have changed since then. Loki and Elsa were weaker. Luke Cage provided less certain protection for Havoc, and some then dominate decks have even disappeared. So they play tested Havoc Viper months ago, probably before we have this current metagame. So now that we're in this current metagame, they're just like, okay, let's just be careful here. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like their playtesting is months ahead, essentially. So a lot of their changes are just like in reaction. In their OTAs are in reaction, where their patches are like based on months ahead playtesting. It seems. Because of the potential for that combo of plays can be so unfun, we're making that change to ensure it doesn't exceed our expectation of warp in that game. Yeah, this is something I mentioned that I didn't think that Havoc Viper would survive. So, I mean, I didn't expect it to be so quickly though. But this is some change, and they'd rather adjust Viper than adjust Havoc, which I think is fair. It's also just a good opportunity to shift Viper to a different cost. So yeah, I mean, Viper itself is just a card a lot of times you use with the hood. Sometimes you can also use it with Sentry, the Sentry -10. But in both of those circumstances, I mean, it's probably still fine for Viper to do what it does. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. I don't really dislike this one as much. I think it's okay. And the Havoc Viper combo, I think if it just stuck around, was like too annoying. Right, turn 3 Havoc Viper, you're locked into 3 mana for the rest of the game. Like, not fun. So I will say, like, Havoc Viper statistically isn't doing that well. So if you were to like look at the combo and say, is this combo doing that well statistically? The answer is no. Like, if you get Havoc Viper, you're going to leave, right? Like it is not that. It's pretty clear like that you're going to be in trouble. So you're not getting that many cubes. Like, and it's not that common. Like, people are going to snap early. So a lot of times you're getting 1 or 2 cubes. So the cube rate of doing the combo isn't that high. So that's kind of the issue. You're probably getting 2 cubes at max. So, it is annoying, but it's not a game changer on turn 5, turn 6 where you can get like these huge cube swings, 4 to 8 cubes. So that's like the difference maker there. But yeah, they're just being cautious because the combo is unfun for sure. So interesting to see that. Next up, we have Ronan. This is a pretty interesting change, I would say. They're giving Ronan 2 power, which is actually quite meaningful, right? It means that they essentially start on 5, so it's a 5/5 base, right? If your opponent has 2 cards of 5/9, like, that's not hard to have 2 cards left in your hand at the end of the game. Like, so even a 5/9 is like not horrible, but clearly it could be much better than that, right? Like, if you're running any synergies, right, you can easily give them like 2 to 4 cards without them like on top of whatever they're holding, right? So you could easily have like 4 or 5 cards in their hand, right? Which is like a 5/13, 5/15. Like, that's where you're getting like good stat lines for turn 5. So even this 2 power it looks small, but it's actually quite meaningful. So definitely possible to start seeing some Ronan decks. I will say that this probably does make Loki better. So that's the counter argument here that, if Ronan actually does become meta viable and quite good, you might just see more Loki, and Loki's already in the meta. Just because, let's say they play Master Mode on you, right? Like, that's something that you might start seeing. If you can just Loki it away and you get cheap cards for free. So that's just something that is gonna hold Ronan back. I think at the highest levels that there's like an easy answer that's not being nerfed, just Loki. So that's why my one caveat to be careful. Though it does seem fun to play Ronan, and right now, if day 1, people are probably not going to be running. Well, I mean, there might not be as much Loki as you would want there. You would not want there to be. Maybe like 3 days later. So It's definitely interesting to try out Ronan right now and see how it feels, and then maybe adjust based on how the meta changes. But yeah, definitely cool to see. Ronan's a card we've been talking about, been weak for a long time, so this might make it more playable. So yeah, it's been on our buff list for months. I would love if cards get buffed faster than on a multiple month time frame, but you know, it's better than having to wait forever. We waited a few pilcher for a few reasons. Some was some concerns about how to push past archetypes. We're also considering a more significant rework. And eventually buffing Ronan into Loki didn't seem right. I mean, Loki is still in the meta, so it's still, you're still kind of doing that, but I see what you're saying. So I just stick to something simple, adding some power to create a more meaningful 5-cost threat. Yeah, I mean, adding power does help. Like 2 power is a lot. In general, like in terms of this game, 2 power changes the power of a lot of cards. So adding 2 power to Ronan is definitely impactful. So we'll see how that actually changes things. And then we also have Maximus going from 3/7 to 2/6 to kind of help Ronan. So Ronan loves cards. This gives your opponent 2 cards. So this is a huge buff for Ronan. I also think this buff is just a, like, this is probably just a good card. Like a 2/6 generically. That's just good stats. Like very easily. You play this on the last turn. This could do a lot for you. So I can definitely see this being played in more archetypes just as a 2/6. Like Sarah will make this a 1/6. Like that could also be pretty powerful. So there's just a lot of good things that could happen with Maximus as a 2/6. Like compared to a 3/7, like 2/6 is significantly good. So I just think this is a card that you can just see it played in a lot of different decks, probably, with this change. So it's just to see where Maximus ends up with these changes. But yeah, pretty significant buff for Maximus as well. As an additional support piece for Ronan, we're delivering a buff to Maximus. It was one of the early additions to Silver Surfer, but people aren't playing him in Silver Surfer anymore. Since you've continued to release 3-cost cards, yeah, there's so many 3-costs to choose from that Maximus isn't as premium as it used to be. It used to be like Cosmo Maximus, that kind of thing. Now it's like you could play Dakin, you could play Shaw, yeah, for sure. Maximus struggled to earn that slot. We're happy to see the release of Blob provide a surge to Maximus. Yeah, so yeah, Blob is it like Max is a good answer to Blob for sure. It's not the best answer. You could still, like, you're still losing, to be fair. Like the opponent plays Blob on you, and you, even if you play Max, you're still losing. So it's not like the end of the world, especially if they're playing Thanos, since you could just get their stones. But it is something to do. It is a good target for Blob itself. We're decided to capitalize on this momentum and see if Maximus could even play a role in other decks. So yeah, definitely, I like this change. I think this change is pretty cool. So cool to see that one. And we have even more changes. So Gladiator is getting a buff, so it's reverting back to its original power. I mean, I think this makes sense. The problem is Gladiator is just a risky card to play. Like just being able to hit some battle cries, right? It just hurts. So it's a risky card, but sometimes you'll take that chance. And the 3/8 style line is pretty good, so maybe it'll be worth it. But yeah, definitely makes sense. I think 3/7 was like just not relevant enough to be warranted in most decks. This is a very similar change we're making, like Martyr. Gladiator's been more successful, but it seems like there's still room to improve. Yeah. Moving Masters out of the 3-star will create avoidance for some Silver Surfer decks that want access to a large amount of power. So this is an opportunity for Gladiator. Sure. I mean, I don't know if this is going to change too much your opinions on Gladiator, but it does help Gladiator for sure. So it's a fine buff, I think. Like testing it at 3/7 was okay. Initially, when Gladiator was revealed, it was like, oh, does it? Well, on reveals and ongoings and all that stuff affected. If it was no, then this is a great card. If yes, then it's a little bit worse, right? So the answer is yes. So it's a lot worse. So now you have to kind of make up for it with some power gains. And then last and I mean, is at least it's definitely probably not going to be that impactful. But we do have a Punisher buff getting 1 power as well. It means that its max potential is a 3/7. Amazing, right? Like that is if your opponent plays into the lanes, it's a 3/7, which a lot of times it's not that common. I would, but it is something. So what if it was like a 3/1 with +2? Is that worse? A 3/1 with +2? Right, so the potential is 3/9 instead of 3/7. I mean, but that is a playable card comparative to a 3/2 or a 3/3. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's better, but it's not going to change anything, right? Like, I do think they want the starter cards to be underpowered so that you'll be more excited for new cards coming out, right? So I don't think they're like, oh, let's make this meta viable. They're thinking we want this to be okay, but not as so good that people are playing this instead of new cards they could be purchasing. So definitely an interesting adjustment here. Punisher has been unnecessarily weak for a while. However, as far as the new play experience, we have to be careful about how we adjust the card. For example, if we turn it to 2 costs, we'd have to move some other card to 3 costs to kind of fit their like balancing regimen or something for new players. Even with that restriction, I think a single power is basically free and should make the card a more fun game piece. I mean, maybe for new players, right? This might be something to mess with, but I think as you get past that, it's really not. It's not good enough. Like the other 3 drops are much better, so we'll have to see. But I mean, it's not. It's like the 1 power is not going to change anything too much. But overall, those are the changes. It's actually a surprising amount of changes here, like 7 or 8. Professor X's not in love with it. Werewolf is justifiable. Black Widow, I think, is weird. I don't know where you're gonna play Black Widow easily now. Martyr's understandable. Viper is to react to Havoc Viper, which is understandable, even though the Havoc Viper stats aren't very good. Ronan is interesting. It just makes me scared for if this is good, Loki is gonna see more play. So that's kind of the concern there. Maximus, I think, is the most interesting change, or maybe one of the more interesting changes. Gladiator is also understandable, and then Punisher is understandable, even though it's likely not too impactful. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on these changes? You like them? You hate them? You're still confused about the lack of Loki nerfs? I personally still am. I still think Loki is still like a problem, at least at high elo. So we'll see. But there's definitely less Loki players. I will say. With Thanos Blob coming out and things like that, there's definitely been a dip in Loki. So we'll see if that trend continues or if these changes will kind of bring Loki back like that. But yeah, a lot of changes to strong meta decks in the meta. So we wonder how that will affect the meta as a whole. But yeah, take care. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be